We live in a broken world, and a broken culture. It's not going well. Things are so broken, there is now an entire all-encompassing category of death called deaths of despair. Alcoholism, drug overdoses, and suicide. That should be a major warning sign that we are missing the mark when deaths of despair is a term that people know. We can just look at suicide numbers. 50,000 people killed themselves in 2022. It's a record high. I don't know, maybe someone's like, oh, it's not that many. I don't know, record high. How about this fact? Men 75 and older had the highest suicide rate, nearly double the rate of people 15 to 24. That's interesting. That's worth its own analysis. That men, when they reach 75 or older, like what happened in their life that they think it's worth ending it now? Is it regret? What's happening there? Maybe we can touch on that a little later in the show with some of our great guests. We've gotten very good at surviving as human beings. We're good at surviving. People can live a long time. But we're not that great at thriving. So in today's show, we're going to talk about how to not just survive, but how to thrive. One more point before we get into it. We talk about deaths of despair. That's its own thing. But what about life of despair? People living in despair. It's its own problem. 3.7 million kids, 12 to 17, had at least one major depressive episode in the last year. Depressed kids? Depressed kids? Did you ever hear of such a thing when you were growing up? Oh, what's wrong with, where's Susie? Oh, she's very depressed. I've never heard of that. What is going on? Why is this? Well, I want to argue. I got 3 points. Like the worldview we have today, that we created today, there could be no other way. This, of course, is the natural result of that worldview. So 3 points to make. The very first point, I would argue that this is the result of the modern worldview that says there are three, I should say it like this. There are three fundamental statements that our worldview today makes. There are three fundamental statements. They're all wrong, but most people have grabbed onto them. The first is, who are you to say? The second is, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And the third is, oh, that's just my truth. These are all wrong. Conservatives, on the other hand, should be standing for the good, the beautiful, and the true. John, can you throw that slide back up there, please? I want to be able to visualize this. We can't focus. So who are you to say, right? That is the opposite of standing for the good, right? Oh, well, someone will say you shouldn't do that. Oh, well, who are you to say what's good or bad? We can't focus on beautiful things because we're told, oh, well, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Here's this hideous art or this monstrosity of a building, and I think it's beautiful. It's like, no, that's anti-art. That is not beautiful at all. And we can't focus on objective truth because we're told, oh, well, that's my truth. But that's it. Those are the three lies of our day. Who are you to say beauty's in the eye of the beholder and my truth? And conservatives need to stand for the good, the beautiful, and the true. We need to stand for these things because when people don't, it's a mess. And it's reflected in their life and it's reflected in our culture at large. All right, second big point. The state of despair in our country today is the result of not understanding the true nature of man. Most people think that man is born good. So then when something bad happens, or when things don't go well, or when we get depressed, everyone's all like, how could this be? Right? The reality is, man is fallen. Man is dead in sin. Man is blind, cut off from God, deceived, and desperately wicked. Like, gee, Slater, that sounds like a lot. I didn't make it up. That's the biblical view of man. It's in the book. But we don't have a biblical worldview anymore. Most people, even Christians, think that man is good. So then when bad things happen, it's like this massive tragedy. Like, oh, how could this possibly? But if you have the correct view of man, then when bad things happen, you're like, well, yeah, of course the bad thing happened. Man is fallen, dead in sin, blind, cut off from the life of God, deceived, and desperately wicked. this brokenness that we have today in our lives, individual lives, and the culture at large, it comes from the fall. Like literally chapter 3 of that book up on the screen there. Chapter 3 explains why we are the way we are. But people don't believe it. Many Christians don't believe it. Our kids certainly aren't taught it in school. Many Christians think we're good. So the problem with this is if you misassess reality, you're going to keep misdiagnosing the problem. And then you're going to keep coming up with the wrong solutions, right? And you're going to look for solutions in all the wrong places. And it's just going to make things way worse. And this ties into number 3, because if you don't know the main problem, you're going to look for the wrong solutions. And usually it's like some sort of materialistic answer, right? And that's the third big lie of our culture today. A misidentification of this thing we call the American dream. We've been talking a lot about this on my show on SiriusXM Patriot, this idea of the American dream. We've been told that it's a material thing, that the American dream is making more money than your parents did. And we would frame it as like living a better life than your parents did, but it always had like a money connotation. And sometimes it'd be more specific, like, oh, the American dream is to buy a house. I just really want to push back on that. I think we can do better than that. That can't be it. The American dream can't be a material thing. You know, a lot of suicides are because of financial problems. Loss of money, loss of a job, and you lose a job and you lose your identity. Like, who am I anymore? Stuff like that, right? I'd much rather live in a country where the American dream isn't tied to material success or failure, but has to do with virtue. And if money and a good job and a house may come from that, that's great. If it doesn't, it doesn't matter. It's all about how you live your life. I don't want the American dream to be dependent on whether or not the Federal Reserve raises interest rates or not. Like that can't be right. And that's what our founding fathers meant when they wrote Pursuit of Happiness. You have a God-given right for your life, your liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Happiness wasn't this fleeting emotion. It was a true, lasting happiness that came from living a life of virtue. And pursuit meant the habitual practice of. So Thomas Jefferson, just as could have, he did. What he really wrote was, you have the right to practice virtue. That's how we need to view. Pursuit of happiness means practice virtue. It doesn't mean YOLO and go and be happy. Do little fleeting things that in the short term make you happy. Why would Thomas Jefferson write that? It's about practicing virtue. But we don't do that. We don't have those concepts even. So we're off by a lot. We're misaligned by just a mile.